So when I turned up to come fishing this evening, it was glorious. Granham were hatching, the sun was out, it was lovely and warm, a bit like it is now to be honest. And then this happened. That really put paid to the Granham hatch, as you can imagine, and the hailstones actually were going sideways at some points and hurt quite a lot. My poor cameraman was out there filming slow-mos, and this is what he looked like. So I've got two choices. I can either go home or I can adapt. Now luckily I've come equipped to do something a little bit different, which is a style of fishing we don't do very much of in the UK at all, which is a little bit odd to be honest, because it's massive all over the rest of the world, and that is streamer fishing. Fishing small baitfish patterns in rivers like this, tapping into the predatory instincts of fantastic wild brown trout. So let's have a little chat about what you need to go streamer fishing. First of all, the rod. That is a 9 foot for a 5 weight for this type of river. It's not very big, I don't need to cast too far, so a 5 weight will look after me. At the moment I'm fishing a floating line, and I've got about 10 feet of 13-pound fluorocarbon tied directly to the end of my fly line. No taper, just straight fluorocarbon. And on the end of it, I've tied this thing, which is a fly created by a mate of mine called Hector Rodriguez, who does lots and lots of predator fishing. And he creates these little micro streamers, which are perfect for trout fishing. I've got standard reel, and I'm just going to be casting across the river, pulling that streamer back and hoping that a trout latches on. Now, in terms of the flies, let's be honest, it's pretty ugly in there. Some nasty things with great big tungsten bead heads, all sorts of feathers coming off the end, red ones with cone heads, little tiny things like that imitate minnows, all sorts of stuff. And it's just a case of plodding around, trying to find what those fish want and just having a bit of fun, which is what fishing is all about, isn't it? Now typically, now the sun's out again and I expect the fish will start popping and taking dries again, but I'm going to persevere and fish the streamers because it's something that I really want to have a proper go at and really enjoy doing it, because it really is good fun. Again, something just a little bit different, which is, you know, all part of the fun of fishing, which is what fishing should be. So let's have a little look and see what happens. And this is how effective this method could be. Honestly, I've had half a dozen casts, chucked the streamer over the far side, and everything locked up, and there's a really nice fish on the end. Quite a big streamer too, which I'll show you in a second. But look at this fella. Now, if you didn't realise that trout were predatory, now you know. This trout is absolutely seething, and if there was ever any doubt that these things are predatory, then surely this has dispelled it straight away, because that take was insane. The streamer went over the far bank, I let it drop for about 10 seconds, strip, bang, and tore off upstream. It's not even that big a fish, to be honest, it's a couple of pounds, and it's taken a huge streamer, which, you know, let's not make any bones about it, it's a copy of a minnow or a small fish. So these things, when they're predatory, when they're in the mood to eat other fish, just watch out. Fantastic stuff. There's a few things to consider when you're doing this sort of fishing, which is what sort of response you're looking to get from the fish. And there are really 3 things that will mean you might get a take. Of course, there's a feeding response, which is basically the trout sees what it thinks is a small silverfish go past, and it eats it because it's hungry. But also there's a territorial response. So a fish might be living in a certain spot, and you can see around here there's some really interesting cover on the far bank, some little cabbages over there, tree stumps, all that kind of thing. If you drop the streamer in there and it's the trout's residence, it's been living there for a while, then it will be an aggressive territorial response. It will try to clear the fish away from where it lives as an angry kind of, you know, get out of here type of thing. The third type of response is purely curiosity. Trout don't have hands, so if they want to find out what something is, they put it in their mouths. And by then, it's all too late. Now, this is such a great fun method because it's very mobile. It's very kind of, I suppose, attacking, you know, quite a dynamic thing to do. You're casting a lot, big fly, big cast, so it feels quite satisfying when it all goes right. You get your timing right and you drop that streamer in right behind a little thing over on the far bank. It's just something slightly different, and it's not something you do all the time. But when you turn up here today and it was chucking it down with hail and, you know, the weather was so awful, there really isn't another alternative other than going home. So I'm really pleased I had the 5-weight in the back of the car. The other thing to talk about is how you cast, because it is a little bit different also. Now, these streamers have great big tungsten beads, some of them 5-6 millimeter tungsten bead, tungsten heads. They sink really fast and they're really heavy. The last thing you want when you're casting a big fly like that is for it to hit the blank of your rod, or actually you in the back of the head. So a really useful tip is to change the way you cast. So rather than your rod being upright, you drop it at a slight angle to the other side of your shoulder. And what that means is that the fly, tracking backwards and forwards, never really goes near the tip of the rod. The other thing, because it's heavy, is you just wait a little bit longer on your back cast for that rod tip to load. And then once you feel that tap at the top of the rod tip, you can start to make your forward cast. And I'm just going to explore down the riverbank, casting into likely looking spots, seeing if I can pick up a fish or two. Now, the other thing is the retrieve. So the object of the exercise is to get that fly across the river and to get it deep. And it's got a very big tungsten head on it, 10 feet of fluorocarbon and a floating line. I cast out, I count to 10 to let that fly drop all the way through the layers, and this stretch of the river is ever so deep. And then when I'm happy the fly's down and it can pop around, strip it back. Very retrieve, little short movements, long slow pulls, tiny little jerky ones, just to vary it up and make that dance in the water so it looks appealing to those trout. Let's just go through that process again. So get my cast away, right over to the far bank, straighten everything out a little bit, count to 10 so that fluorocarbon leader's dropping through the layers with that fly fluttering down, and now one big strip to pop it up and start pulling it back and hope it attracts the attention of a predatory trout. Well, I've not had any interest since that first fish, so a little change is in order. I've taken off that big heavy white pulsing fly and I've put on something slightly smaller. This is obviously a minnow pattern, so if you look at the way it's made up, a CDC tail, a body which is olive with kind of iridescent tinsel tied in, a red collar which is just like the gill plate on a minnow, and there's the tungsten bead with another tungsten bead tied behind it. Now this will fish in a slightly different way to a bigger fly. It won't be quite as active, but it is just as effective. Now, another tactic that's really useful with this sort of fishing, if you're allowed, on the river that you fish on, is to cast downstream. Why that's really useful is that if you've got a fish sat in the middle of the river facing you, you chuck the streamer past it and pull it back. Sometimes they just can't resist chasing it. And actually the chase is the most important thing. If you can get a fish following the fly, then you've got half a chance of it grabbing the imitation and hooking up. It's also a brilliant method, you know, if you're wading. Now, this water here is far, far too deep for me to get in and wade. But if you are able to wade in your river, it's well worth doing it from the water. Again, casting downstream, if you're allowed in the river that you fish on, and just trying to hunt those trophy fish. Now, of course, the other thing to consider here is the size of the fish that you're targeting, because if they're eating small fish, they're big fish. You know, they didn't get to the size they are just by eating little tiny nymphs and granums and sipping delicately dry flies off the surface. These things are killers. They're cannibalistic. They eat small trout, they eat minnows, they eat little roach, all sorts of stuff. Big nymphs too. So if your fly imitates something that's quite large in size and is very active, then it's an interesting prospect. Now here's a classic lie. Lovely old tree over the other side, a little bit of structure on the far bank, and a little bit of kind of, the bank is cut back a wee bit, so it's an area out of the main flow, the type of place where a fish might well sit. And that's your territorial attack. So if I can get a cast right over to the far bank, counting to 10 again, just pop that fly up again and strip it back and see if I can't entice a take. Now the other thing to consider when you're fishing like this is don't switch off. You should be thinking, as you're retrieving, every single cast that a fish is following your fly and will take at any second. Because the second you switch off is when it happens. Concentration levels are really high. As I say, it's quite a dynamic way of fishing. Short session, perfect for it. Couple of hours, you know, explore your local river and have a little go. And I suppose the thing is, if you're a still water angler, the kit isn't a million miles away from what we're using here, is it? Floating line. Something like a damsel pattern would work really well. How often do you see damsels at the river? And you can strip those back quite quickly, as you know. So a really effective tactic. Really important not to ignore these slacks on the inside bank too, rather than chucking it right across the river. I've just put a little black streamer up the inside bank. You can see what a gorgeous time of day it is, and this is when this sort of fishing really does take off. I think they go on the prowl now. This is a nice fish. This is a proper lump. Wow. This is what this sort of fishing is all about. You know, I said earlier on about trophy fish, proper great big things. Look at the fight that's putting in. Now I have got pretty heavy gear on here, 13-pound breaking strain fluorocarbon, but there's quite a lot of flow in the river. And I'm using a barbless hook, so I don't really want to push it too hard. I'm just wondering what this is. It could be a brownie, or it could be one of the rainbows that's stocked in the river. A rainbow. Fantastic. I did fancy it for a rainbow behind that tree, you know. It's the kind of place they live. Oh, wonderful stuff. Again, tapping into those predatory instincts safely in the net. It's a good fish. A beautiful stocky rainbow from the river test here at Tinsbury. Caught on a black streamer, he's going straight back in. So just putting in a really long cast across to the far bank, using the current to help me fish behind this tree here. There's no other way I could present my streamer, so what I'm doing is letting my cast go as far over the river as I can, letting the line, the floating line, pull it down, and then I can kind of fish on the swing. Brilliant method. And you get again that, oh, hello, oh, twig, not fish. Just thought for a second I had a take. Yeah, you then get that lovely presentation as it goes downstream. So let's just show you that again. A nice long cast right over to the far bank. Just tighten up, stick a couple of mends into my line to stop it going too fast. It's quite shallow over this bit, the kind of place that would hold fish. And then what I can allow it to do is swing around to the left exploring the river, and then when I'm ready, just pop that fly up and pull it back. And what I'm hoping is that a fish will see it go drifting down, be curious and follow it across. And again, it's absolutely crucial to fish that cast all the way back to the very tip of your rod. Experimenting with different retrieves, some faster, some slower, just to entice a take. Down under the branches, going to fish it a bit deeper in the swim this time, exploring just a little different piece of river. Now I'm going to strip and pull it up. And I hope you can see this is just such a great fun method. You know, you get to explore quite a lot of the river and fishing it in slightly different ways. So you'll end up fishing water that perhaps you wouldn't normally fish. And you'll, as a result, possibly catch fish that you may never catch. So it's well worth giving it a go. Just fancy this little slack behind the tree as well as a holding spot. If you take the weather when we arrived this evening into account, it's a very, very different day now. The other beauty with this sort of fishing is you can take it really deep. We're right at the very end of the fishing session. Gorgeous sunset over there with the clouds that probably brought that hailstorm to us a little while ago. But what sometimes happens, as is just then, whoa, right at last knockings, you hook something fantastic, just like that. Amazing take that was. Again, that was on that swing, swinging right across the river. Nearly took the rod out of my hand. I was so surprised it took. I wonder what this is. Is this a rainbow or a brownie? And what have we got here? It's a big old brownie, I think. If you wonder why I was thinking streamer fishing was a bit special, how about that for the final fish of the day? Just as the light's going, this monster grabbed the fly right in the middle of the river, tore around like you wouldn't believe, and just summed everything up fantastically well. Let's just have one more look at him before we pop him back. He's a real old bruiser. Definitely a predatory fish that lives on small fish and great big nymphs and goes on a feeding frenzy just as the sun goes down. Incredible sport. What a brilliant thing to see.